Hi everyone, this is part 4 of our series, Secret History of Post-Paul Church, and we're talking about Tertullian in his book Against Marcion in 207 AD. And the question is, did Tertullian refer to Paul as apostle of the heretics? Some people tried to make this controversial, which it is not. Okay, so if one were looking strictly at Latin, okay, and this is the document Catholic Omnia, whatever. So if you're strictly looking at Latin, Paul is clearly just called Paul is the apostle of the heretics. Okay, it's in Adversus Marcion 3.5. Okay, haereticorum apostolus. But now translating that into English, people want to add words. Let's see. Okay, so back in 1887, apparently there weren't a lot of Bibles around that were mistranslated yet, or he could read Latin. So Edwin Johnson says it is clear that Tertullian had no liking for Paul. By the way, he's not a Christian writer, so in my view, he's objective in terms of he's not trying to sway things towards Paul or away from Paul, whatever. He's just telling it the way it is in this work from 207 AD. So he says it is clear that Tertullian had no liking for Paul. He calls him the heretics apostle. So that's essentially the same thing as the apostle of the heretics. Mr. Lietzmann, whom the representative of the Early Church 101 website, who was telling me it shouldn't be just, apostle of the heretics, you have to add more words in there because it's to reflect what the real meaning of this is. But he told me to look at Lietzmann, so I did, and this is what he says. Lietzmann said, quote, the writings of Paul, the haereticorum apostolos of Tertullian, were regarded suspiciously at Rome. Yes, this expression about Paul is not a positive, it's a negative, and it's a reflection on him that he became the apostle of the heretics. Now it turns out in 1868, Peter Holmes mistranslated the term apostle of the heretics as the apostle whom the heretics adopt. This is at 3.5. And I'm going to show you that. I did study 3 years of Latin. I got a classical language scholarship and received a certificate as a classical language scholar for that work on my Latin. And so I'm pretty sure this is correct. Okay, so this is Ante-Nicene. I never say it right. I want to always say Ante-Nicene. Ante-Nicene means before Nicaea. So this is what I'm calling post-Paul. They call Ante-Nicene because I don't think the church should mark its chronology based on Nicaea. Anyway, 1868, and it's so the Schaff series of books were based on the Ante-Nicene Christian Library. We're more familiar with his editions of it. But anyway, 1868, let me show you who wrote this or translated it. Okay, so rather than just pick a simple title like Against Marcion, which is the original title, it's named the 5 books of Tertullian's Against Marcion. And it's translated by Peter Holmes, Doctor of Divinity. He's the domestic chaplain to the Right Honorable the Countess of Rothis. Okay, what does he do? Okay, so I just want to talk to you about this Doctor of Divinity does this. He adds words. When the very apostle whom our heretics adopt, when he then footnotes, and if you knew Latin, you'd know immediately what he's telling you is, I've added words here, if you know Latin, because you would know immediately, haereticorum apostolos doesn't translate out when the very apostle whom our heretics adopt. You would know immediately, instantly, if you know Latin, and I was trained in Latin in high school and got a scholarship for Latin, got a certificate of classical language scholar for my Latin work, so I'm pretty sure how to translate those 2 words. Okay, haereticorum is a possessive. It means of the heretics. Apostolos is apostle of the heretics, and you read in more or less you read in reverse. Anyway, the point is this: he didn't in the text where it says when the very apostle whom our heretics adopt. What he was supposed to do is take every word that is not translated, meaning they're not in the text, and he needed to put them in brackets. So he would have had to take the word very, put that in brackets. So it would read, when the apostle. Take out the word very because you've added it. Whom our Got to put those in brackets because those are not in the original text. And the word adopt is nowhere conceptually in the sentence. You got to put that in brackets. So the person could see when apostle heretics. And then you really should put in there when the apostle of the heretics. So you actually have to put in the words that are implied. And haereticorum is a possessive. It means of the. Okay? So he took out of the. Now you got to put it back in. So you have to put in of the. And then you have to bracket whom are, and of course then the reader would go, what's that? The apostle, the very apostle whom are of the heretics adopt, and then adopt is in brackets. That's how he should have done it. That's the job of a translator, okay? But what I want to suggest is the reason he put hereticorum apostolos on the bottom is to deflect anybody who would accuse him of lying, because that's exactly what he's doing. He didn't use brackets to tell the truth. He used a footnote to tell the truth to the 1% of people in the universe at that time who knew how to speak and write Latin, okay? That's the only people who would have known he's lying, and not lying. That's the only people who would know how truthful he was being in translating. So he's not being truthful in translating, but at least with the footnote, the Latin readers would understand he's misrepresenting the text, and you could forgive him for it because you know what it means. But what about the 99% are ignorant, such as the early church history writer? Early Church 101 was faulting me, saying I was mistranslating, and I was telling people it said what it said, and it says what it says. So this is it. He is clearly, I put a little black thing there. It deserves to be in black. This was to assuage his conscience by showing the true words are only these two words. That's why he did that. And I even believe everything after that. He's telling you his explanation really in his heart why he did this. We have already referred to Marcion's, this is after Hereticorum Apostolus. We have already referred to Marcion's acceptance of St. Paul's epistles. What he's trying to say is, I've already told you that previously he accepts Paul's epistles as valid and belongs in the Bible or whatever. That's not really true, but what he said is that he believes that Paul is the Benjamite wolf who in the morning killed and murdered, and in the evening, according to the Septuagint translation, he divided the food, or he distributed the food. In the actual Hebrew, it's negative. It's shalal, and it means he divided the spoils, which is a negative thing where he's dividing up the ill-gotten gain. But Tertullian did not know Hebrew and did not have the Hebrew Bible, and so he's dependent upon the Septuagint for Genesis 49, verse 26, 27. So anyway, that's the reference of why he accepted Paul. That's the only reason he accepted Paul, because he knew of that prophecy of Paul. And we've talked about why that fell out of use, because people did learn shalal was the actual meaning in Hebrew, and it was a negative, and then they stopped telling people Paul it fulfills this prophecy of Genesis 49, because now you would get this negative prophecy about Paul. But that's a whole nother story. I have a whole video on that. So anyway, I stop on this point because this is constant. People who believe they can lie for the sake of the gospel, and guess they're lying for Paul, and he actually says in Romans 3:7, unless you're willing to distort and add words to this, which the NIV in its latest edition has added 6 or 7 words to this to try to make it sound like Paul isn't saying this, but all other texts have it, that Paul is saying, hey, if I'm lying, if I'm lying for the good sake of the gospel, why am I still called a sinner? See, and that's exactly, look at the pollution that caused this particular doctor of divinity to actually lie to 99% of the readers. Basically, everyone who can't read Latin cannot know. He has added all these words. He did not bracket them. He did not do anything to signal that these words were added by him by means of an interpretation of what he wants you to think. And he tells you right here in the footnote why he's doing that, because he believes Tertullian has already committed himself to accepting Paul. That's not the logic. That first of all, you can't do that. And this passage is the bridge where he's crossing over the line, so to speak. It's book 3. It's right in the middle. He's starting to whittle away at Paul's validity. And so that's important. By switching it around this way, it sounds like the heretics adopted Paul as their son. He's below them. It's sort of like they, that changes the relationship. But when you say apostle of the heretics, that means Paul is the apostle above them. He's the one they're following, just like we might say Matthew is our apostle, or Peter or John is our apostle, so we look up to him. The way that he changed the meaning, it was that they looked down at their apostle whom they adopted. And it's like our little son. We take him wherever we go. It's not that they're following him. He's supporting them. He's keeping company with them. So he changed the meaning 100%, flipped it. And that's never a proper thing for a translator to do. And I just want to show you something is the New Advent, who actually usually uses Latin to translate from, and you can't inadvertently come up to this. It uses the exact same words. The New Advent is a current online Catholic website, so they have Against Marcion on there too. But guess what they did? They did the same thing, and in the identical words. I mean, the identical words. So it's hard. You know something is being copied when the words aren't there in the original text, and it's an identical quote mistake, an identical deliberate fabrication of text. So here we go. We just have people who have no respect for the original written word, and if you're fraudulently adding, but I don't blame New Advent. They're looking over here, and they probably can't read these. I'm going to assume they didn't read Latin and they didn't know what he meant. And so this guy, the Doctor of Divinity, it all falls on him. Whatever the consequence of this lie is, it's on his soul if he didn't repent. And whatever the consequences in the kingdom for leaving this way is his fault. New Advent copied him. I don't know if they didn't know Latin, how to read Latin. Okay, so but if he had bracketed it, then they would have bracketed it because they would have to tell their readers the truth that it's not really there. Okay, so anyway, that's I just want to show you it's now permeating that you can do this. We can just take it from the Ante-Nicene series, and as long as it's blessed by the Protestants, even the Catholics now use it. Okay, but I'm not going to ask you to believe me. I'm going to ask you to believe someone that you can't really dispute. Oxford University Press, 1972, translated by Ernest Evans, 1972. And see, this is when I was graduating high school, so this guy has a few years on me, I bet. And he was he did it, edited, and he translated it. And this is how he does it. And in fact, it's interesting. He does add the word own, I should say, but it's again, of the means it's possessive, so it's actually not a bad translation what he does here. It's articulates the Latin more. Even the heretic's own apostle interprets as concerning not oxen but ourselves that law which grants an unmuzzled mouth to the oxen that treads out the corn. So that's an accurate translation. Okay, that's why you need people who are objective sometimes, who don't have a religious axe to grind. Oxford University Press typically is just trying to give the reader the truth, not lie, not conceal, not distort, not mislead, but the truth. And again, I just want to say this is proof of the poison. See, people say, well, you don't want people to read Paul anymore. Yeah, look at Romans 3:7. If you had a teacher teaching you and asking the question, why is my lie, which I'm doing to advance the gospel, if I'm lying for the gospel, why am I still called a sinner? Because he's saying you're not sinning when you're lying for the gospel. That's what he's saying. And unless you're willing to do what the NIV did is change that verse and add six or seven more words. I forget how many they did. They added something like, well, what if someone said this, as if Paul wasn't saying it? Well, that's just completely fabricated out of thin air. Okay, but this is where we are today. We have Christians whose leaders are defending and deflecting Paul, not by telling you the truth and bringing more truth to you, but by hiding and covering up and concealing. And here was a perfect example to me. You're reading Against Marcion. I was just communicating on my website that it said apostle of the heretics, and this guy from early church history, I found out somebody sent me a link to the website, and he said I lied. And then he made it sound like I hadn't even said what the alternative translation was, and I did. I even quoted this passage, but to his audience, he quoted only the passage from the Ante-Nicene and said I lied, that it said heretic, apostle of the heretics. And I don't blame him because he didn't know Latin, and I give him credit. He went and asked an expert. The expert said I was right. The Latin does say apostle of the heretics. his friend just simply said if you read the whole 5 books, the flow of it, you would conclude that it wasn't meant as a negative remark. So it's not unjustifiable to add any words to try to make that clear to the reader. And I would just simply say to that I would only say to that historian, writer, you are a writer, you're a professional writer. Would you want anyone to translate any of your books into a foreign language and add words? Send me a letter if you would let him do that. That would materially change what's on the page, and that's key. And not using an interpretation of what he or she thinks you mean, but actually he or she is saying that's what's on the page, and you wouldn't want that. So we can't ever do that. That is against the rules. It's a lie to the reader. And if your translator did it, you should tell him, if you are adding any words, please let me know by bracketing them so I can come in and actually reassess whether you have understood my meaning. And you could maybe with Google Translate or something like that decipher whether your book is being translated incorrectly. So I would only just tell that author, and I know his name, I'm not going to say his name, and he's a very reputable person, so it's like came into me as a shock that he would defend mistranslation, but I'm sure he was just trying to support the early church history 101 guy, not make him feel too bad. But this is to me again, it's a theological crime. You cannot change the nature of Against Marcion to be something that's more palatable to you. That's just not good.